No one had the legal right to make the decision except the janitor's daughter. The fate of the powerful CEO, suspended between life and death by a machine, rested entirely in the hands of a 19-year-old cleaning staff temp. She had 48 hours to choose: pull the plug or let the body in the bed, a man she had never met, linger indefinitely. This is what she discovered when she finally looked. The man in the bed was Robert Vance, founder of a billion-dollar tech empire, now a silent figure in a private hospital suite, kept alive by a ventilator after a catastrophic stroke. The legal documents, signed in a hurry years ago, named his sole heir as his surrogate, but his heir was missing. With no spouse and no other family, the hierarchy of decision-makers fell, by a cruel twist, to a temporary employee from the cleaning service. His fate was now her burden. But the file she found in his desk told a different story about the accident, a story someone had tried to erase. Maya's shift at the Sterling Heights Neurocare Center was supposed to be simple: empty the bins, wipe the surfaces, avoid eye contact. The temp agency had been clear: you are invisible here. The 9th floor executive wing was its own world, a place of hushed voices and filtered light, where the air didn't smell like antiseptic, but like money and quiet despair. She was 19, saving for community college, cleaning to pay for the apartment she shared with her mother, who cleaned other floors in a different hospital. It was the family trade. Robert Vance's suite was at the end of the hall, room 907. She cleaned its outer sitting room for 3 weeks, never going past the curtain. She heard the steady, mechanical sigh of the ventilator from within. She saw the procession of somber suits, lawyers, board members, a man from the company called the Chief Operating Officer, enter and leave, their faces etched with a concern that looked a lot like impatience. The legal bomb detonated on a Tuesday. Maya was restocking linen closet 9 when the hospital administrator, a pinched man named Mr. Dewar, and a woman in a severe blazer she'd learned was Vance's corporate attorney, approached her. They stood in the hallway. They explained in cold, precise terms the concept of surrogate hierarchy: spouse, adult child, parent, sibling. They explained that a search for Mr. Vance's only child, a daughter named Elise, had hit a dead end. They explained that the advance directive he'd signed, which named her as his proxy, was, in her absence, functionally useless. The next in line, the attorney said, her voice devoid of inflection, under the state's default consent statute, becomes any available adult who exhibits special care and concern for the patient. The courts interpret that broadly in emergencies. You are listed on his visitor log. You are here daily. Maya stared. I empty his trash. You are present, Mr. Dewar corrected, a note of strained finality in his voice. The ethics committee has reviewed this. With no family, and given the prolonged and costly nature of his care, a decision must be made. You have been identified as the surrogate decision maker. They handed her a packet: medical reports, scans of a brain showing massive, irreversible damage, prognosis, persistent vegetative state, 0 chance of meaningful recovery. The recommendation, signed by 3 neurologists, was clear: withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment was the only medically appropriate course. She had 48 hours to consent. The pressure was not a suggestion. It was in the way Mr. Dewar's pen tapped against his clipboard. It was in the attorney's reminder that the hospital's resources and the patience of Vance's board were not infinite. They needed the bed. They needed closure. They needed her signature. Maya took the packet to the break room, her hands numb. She called her mother, who started crying. She called the temp agency, who told her this was far above their pay grade and not to cause trouble. She sat in the silence, the weight of a man's life and death crushing the air from her lungs. This wasn't care and concern. This was a legal loophole, a way for a system to offload a morally fraught decision onto the most disposable person in the room. That night she couldn't sleep. The phrase persistent vegetative state echoed. She'd never seen him, not really, just the shape under a sheet, the glow of monitors. Who was Robert Vance? The file said billionaire, innovator, recluse. The newspapers, when she searched on her phone, called him a genius and a ghost. He'd built Vantage systems from his garage, revolutionized data encryption, then vanished from public life 6 years ago after his wife's death. His daughter, Elise, disappeared from records around the same time. There were rumors of a feud, a bitter split. The next morning, she went to work early. The hall was empty. The door to 907 was ajar. The sitting room was dark. For the first time, she pushed past the curtain. He was smaller than she imagined. The machine breathed for him. Tubes fed him. His face was pale, slack, a monument to stillness. This was the powerful CEO. This was the man whose choices moved markets. He looked abandoned. The oppressive silence in the room wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a stopped clock. The pressure from the institution became a physical presence. Dr. Evans, the lead neurologist, cornered her after lunch. "Miss Ruiz," he said, not unkindly, but with the weary certainty of a man who's seen too many hopeless cases. "What you're seeing is a body. The person, Robert Vance, is gone. The scans are unambiguous. Continuing is not treatment. It's a parody of life. It's torture for everyone involved, including him, if any part of him is still in there screaming." But was he? The question became an obsession. She started staying late, sitting in the chair beside his bed during her breaks, watching the lines on the monitors. She didn't see special care and concern. She saw a ghost haunting a machine and herself, a stranger, appointed as his exorcist. Then on the final afternoon, as she was cleaning his massive, empty office in the penthouse of the Vantage Tower, a separate job the agency had assigned her, she found it. The bottom drawer of his antique desk, locked. A petty act of defiance made her jimmy it with a letter opener. Inside was not a business file. It was a personal accordion folder, labeled in shaky handwriting, "For Elise, the truth." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She shouldn't. This was a violation deeper than any locked drawer, but the clock was ticking. She opened it. The first page was a police report, dated 6 years ago, the night of his wife's fatal car accident. The official finding was black ice, lost control, but stapled to it was a private investigator's note. 2 words circled in red ink: "Brake lines compromised." Beneath that were financial records, wire transfers made monthly from a hidden account to an offshore bank. The recipient's name was blacked out. The amounts were staggering. The final sheet was a draft of a new will never signed. It disinherited Elise entirely. A handwritten note in the margin, in Vance's frantic script, read, "She knows, she's trying to silence me. The crash wasn't an accident." The file slipped from Maya's fingers, pages scattering on the polished floor. The man in the bed wasn't just a patient. He was a target. His condition wasn't just a tragedy. It was potentially a crime. And the people now pressuring her to let him go forever were the same ones he'd been afraid of. The recommendation to pull the plug wasn't just a medical opinion. It was the perfect way to finish the job. The silence in the penthouse office was deafening. Maya scrambled to gather the scattered pages, her fingers trembling, shoving them back into the folder. Her mind raced, connecting jagged pieces. The compromised brake lines, the secret payments, the fear in his note. "She's trying to silence me." The "she" could only be Elise, his own daughter. But the medical file said his stroke was natural. A catastrophic cerebral hemorrhage. Could a stroke be induced? She didn't know. All she knew was that the narrative of a tragic, unavoidable illness now had a crack running straight through it, and she was standing over it, holding the proof. She hid the folder in her cleaning cart, under a pile of soiled linens. The rest of her shift was a blur of manufactured normalcy. She wiped, she emptied, she smiled weakly at nurses. Every glance felt like an accusation. When Mr. Dewar passed her in the hall, he didn't just look impatient, he looked calculating. Did he know about the file? Was he part of it? That evening, in her tiny apartment, she spread the documents on the kitchen table. Her mother, Rosa, watched in horrified silence as Maya explained. "Mija, this is not our world," Rosa whispered, her face pale. "This is trouble for people like us. You give the folder to the police and walk away." But walking away meant signing the consent form. It meant letting Robert Vance, a man who might have been murdered, be legally, quietly, and permanently erased. The hospital would call it compassionate care. The board would call it closure. Maya would call it complicity. She couldn't go to the police with a theory. She needed a fact. A single, undeniable fact that proved the medical situation was wrong. She remembered Dr. Evans's absolute certainty. The scans are unambiguous. What if they weren't his scans? The next morning, she didn't go to the neurocare center. She went to the public library. She spent hours buried in medical journals, reading about persistent vegetative states, about locked-in syndrome, about rare cases of misdiagnosis. She learned about a thing called covert consciousness, where patients appear vegetative but show brain activity indicating awareness on advanced fMRI scans. Had Robert Vance received an fMRI? The standard reports in her packet only showed CT scans and basic EEGs, tests that could miss such activity. This was her pivot. The medical certainty they were using to pressure her might be built on an incomplete picture. It wasn't proof of a crime, but it was a doubt, a legitimate medical doubt. She returned to Sterling Heights that afternoon, a new resolve hardening inside her. She went straight to Mr. Dewar's office. "I'm not signing," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Not without an independent neurological consultation. I want a second opinion, including a functional MRI." Dewar's veneer of professional patience evaporated. "Miss Ruiz, that is an expensive, unnecessary procedure. Our team's assessment is conclusive. You are delaying the inevitable and prolonging Mr. Vance's suffering." "I'm his surrogate," she fired back, the term now a weapon. "My concern is his care. If the assessment is so conclusive, another test won't hurt, unless you're afraid of what it might show." The change in the atmosphere was instant and chilling. The pressure became overt. Later that day, the temp agency called. Her services at Sterling Heights were no longer required, effective immediately. Her cleaning shift at Vantage Tower was also cancelled. They cited a restructuring. It was a clear warning: stop digging or lose everything. But they'd made a mistake. By firing her, they'd revoked her official access, but they'd also freed her from their schedule. And they'd forgotten she still had the master keycard from her penthouse cleaning duties, a card she'd accidentally never returned. That night, she became a ghost in the machine she used to clean. Using the keycard, she slipped into the Vantage Tower after hours. The goal was his private server. Vance was old school. The file in his desk was a paper trail, but there had to be a digital one. His personal computer was gone, likely secured by the board, but she remembered a sleek, silent server hub in a closet behind his office, its lights always blinking, a network-attached storage device for his most private files. She found it. It was password-protected, of course, but taped to the bottom of the keyboard drawer was a small slip of paper with a string of characters. A password, Clara1972, his wife's name and birth year. Her heart ached for a second. The server opened like a vault, folders upon folders. One was labeled e-divestment. Inside were hundreds of emails, copies of the offshore transfer records, and a series of encrypted memos. The narrative that emerged was not of a greedy daughter, but of a ruthless corporate coup. Elise Vance wasn't acting alone. The memos were between her and Marcus Thorne, the COO Maya had seen at the hospital. They discussed pacifying Robert, who had grown suspicious of accounting irregularities, a massive, silent siphoning of company funds into shell corporations. The plan, outlined in cold corporate jargon, had two phases. Phase 1, discredit and isolate. Use his grief over Clara to push him out, paint him as unstable. Phase 2, if he resisted, implement medical contingency. The last memo, dated 2 days before Vance's stroke, read, "RV scheduled for cardiac stress test at Sterling Heights. Facility is secured. Administering agent available. Ensure neurology team is prepared for cerebrovascular event. Prognosis must be terminal." Maya stopped breathing. It wasn't a car crash. It was a hospital room, a stress test, an administering agent. They hadn't just silenced him after an accident. They had engineered the catastrophe. They had turned a medical procedure into an assassination attempt, banking on the result looking like a natural tragedy. And the neurology team was prepared. Was Dr. Evans prepared? Were the unambiguous scans part of the preparation? He downloaded everything onto a portable drive. As she was leaving, a noise in the hallway froze her. The soft ping of an elevator, security doing rounds, or someone else. She hid in the server closet, watching through a vent as a figure entered the dark office. It was Marcus Thorne. He went straight to the antique desk, tried the locked drawer, found it forced open. He stood perfectly still in the moonlight, then pulled out his phone. "The file is gone," he said, his voice low and sharp. "The cleaner. The Ruiz girl, she has it. Find her, and get that signature. We're out of time." Maya's blood turned to ice. The bridge between the corporate conspiracy and the medical decision was now complete. They didn't just want Robert Vance dead, they needed him dead legally with a surrogate signature to avoid any messy autopsies or probate challenges. She was no longer just an inconvenient surrogate. She was a loose end who had stolen the blueprint to their crime, and they knew it. She waited an eternity for him to leave. Slipping out of the building, she ran through the rain-slicked streets, the drive burning a hole in her pocket. She had the evidence, but she was now a target, and Robert Vance was still in that bed, his time running out not because of his injuries, but because the people who put him there were closing in on the one person standing in their way. Going to the police was now a matter of life and death, not just for the CEO, but for her. But the memo said the facility was secured. How high did that security go? The rain felt like needles on her skin. Maya ran, not home, they'd look for her there, but to the only place she could think of, the all-night diner where her mother worked the graveyard shift as a dishwasher. She burst into the steamy kitchen, clutching the drive, her story pouring out in a frantic, hushed torrent between the clatter of plates. Rosa listened, her hands pausing in the soapy water, her face hardening from fear into a fierce, protective resolve. "Then we don't go to the police here," she said quietly. "We go higher." But higher where, and with what? A digital file she'd stolen from a server she'd accessed illegally. It was evidence, but it was also fruit of a poisonous tree. Any prosecutor could dismiss it. They needed something undeniable, something that couldn't be hacked or deleted. A person. Her mind circled back to the memo. Administering agent available. Someone at Sterling Heights had done it. A nurse, a technician, a doctor, someone who knew how to induce a stroke during a stress test. Find that person, and the digital evidence had a witness. The next morning, using a prepaid phone, Maya called Sterling Heights. Posing as a relative, she asked for the patient log for Robert Vance's procedure day. The clerk, wary, wouldn't give details, but confirmed the attending cardiologist was a Dr. Liam Shaw, and the primary nurse was a Geraldine Mills. 2 names, a doctor and a nurse. She started with Geraldine Mills. Social media showed a woman in her 50s, proud grandmother, recent photos from a cruise, not the profile of a cold-blooded accomplice. Then she found it. A local news brief from 3 months ago, Geraldine Mills's son had been arrested on felony drug charges. The case was dropped 2 weeks later due to lack of evidence. The date the charges were dropped was 1 week before Robert Vance's stroke. It was a lever. Someone had leveraged a mother's love for her child to secure a nurse's compliance. Maya felt sick. She couldn't approach Mills. She'd be too terrified to talk. Dr. Liam Shaw was different. His online footprint was all professional accolades, charity golf tournaments, a seat on the hospital's ethics board. A pillar of the community. Digging deeper into business filings, she found a shell company that owned a portion of a new surgical wing at Sterling Heights. A minor investor. But cross-referencing the other investors revealed a name, a venture capital firm that was a known silent partner in several of Marcus Thorne's side projects. The connection was a thread, thin but tangible. Shaw was invested, literally, in the facility's expansion. A scandal involving a murdered CEO on his table would be catastrophic. He had a different kind of leverage, greed, and reputation. Maya knew she couldn't confront him directly. She needed to force a reaction. She created an anonymous email account. She sent a single sentence to Dr. Shaw's public university address. "I know about the stress test agent. The police will know tomorrow. Talk to me first." It was a desperate bluff. The response was not from Shaw. 40 minutes later, her mother called, her voice shaking. 2 men in suits had come to the diner, asking for Maya, flashing badges that looked official but didn't feel right. They knew about the library research, the questions about fMRIs. They told Rosa it would be in her daughter's best interest to stop harassing medical professionals. The message was clear. They were watching her digital and physical trails. The trap was closing from all sides. The institution, the corporation, and now something that smelled like corrupted law enforcement. Her bluff had triggered a countermove, revealing the conspiracy's reach was even wider than she'd feared. Then the worst turn. She made a final, desperate attempt to get legitimate help. She went to the Central Police Precinct, asking to speak to a detective about a potential assault and corporate conspiracy. The desk sergeant was dismissive until she mentioned Robert Vance's name. His demeanor changed. He made a call. He told her to wait. Man who came out to meet her was not in uniform. He wore a rumpled coat and introduced himself as Detective Russ, Financial Crimes. He listened intently as she laid out the story, showing him photocopies of the paper file, the break lines, the payments, but not mentioning the stolen digital drive. He took notes, his face grave. "This is extremely serious, Miss Ruiz. You did the right thing coming here. We'll need all your evidence, especially anything digital. We can protect you." For a glorious, fleeting moment, she felt the crushing weight lift. She'd been heard. Then, as he walked her out, he said, "Just to be thorough, you said you accessed Mr. Vance's private office after your termination?" She nodded, a cold trickle of dread starting. "And you removed property from that office?" She froze. He gave her a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's a technicality, but we'll need to document it. The chain of evidence. Why don't you come with me? We'll get your official statement and you can hand over the materials. We'll have an officer drive your mother home." The dread solidified into ice. He wasn't offering protection. He was executing a cleanup. Get the evidence, get her statement, and then she'd be in custody on a burglary charge, her credibility destroyed, the evidence lost in an evidence locker forever. The financial crimes detective was part of it. The conspiracy didn't just reach the police, it had a desk there. She pretended to have left the drive at home, promising to bring it. She walked out of the precinct, feeling his eyes on her back, and knew she had just crossed a line from being a nuisance to being a designated fugitive. They would come for her now with the full color of law. With no allies and nowhere to run, she did the only thing left. She went to the one place they wouldn't expect, back to Sterling Heights, not as a cleaner, but as a visitor. She used the last of her cash to buy flowers from the gift shop. She walked into the executive wing, head down, heart hammering. She went straight to room 907. She sat by Robert Vance's bed, the flowers a pathetic prop in her lap, the ventilator sighed. She leaned close, her voice a whisper only he could possibly hear. "I found your file," she said. "I know about Elise and Thorne. I know about the stress test. They're everywhere. The police too. I don't know how to stop them." She was talking to a man who might already be gone, confessing to a statue. It was the lowest point. Then a miracle or a neurological quirk. As she said the name, Clara, his wife's name, the steady line on the heart monitor spiked, just once. A sharp, sudden peak before settling back to its monotonous rhythm. The nurse outside hadn't seen it. Maya stared, her breath caught. Was it a coincidence, a random artifact, or was it an answer? It didn't matter what it was a sign. It was the single, undeniable fact she'd been looking for. Something happened when she spoke. He was not unambiguous. He was not gone. The medical certainty was a lie. Fueled by a desperate, furious hope, she stood up. She walked out, past the nurse's station, and directly into the office of the hospital's patient advocate, a woman named Cynthia Porter, whose name and face were on a placard on the door. Maya closed the door and dropped the pretense. "My name is Maya Ruiz. I am the court-designated surrogate for Robert Vance in 907. I am formally alleging that his neurological prognosis has been deliberately misrepresented as part of a criminal conspiracy to secure a withdrawal of care order. I am requesting an emergency, independent fMRI scan, witnessed by a third-party neurologist of my choosing, under the hospital's own ethical review protocol. If you refuse, or if anything happens to Mr. Vance before that test is completed, my next meeting is with the State Medical Board and every news station in the city." It was a nuclear option. She was playing her last card, publicly and loudly, inside the enemy's fortress. By invoking formal protocol, she created a paper trail too visible to easily disappear. Cynthia Porter, wide-eyed, picked up the phone. The battle for Robert Vance's life was no longer a hidden pressure play. It was now a formal, documented standoff. And for the first time, Maya was not a target hiding in the rain. She was a plaintiff, standing in the light. The next move was theirs, and it would have to be made where everyone could see. The formal request created a shockwave the conspiracy could not contain. Cynthia Porter's call triggered a mandatory review by the hospital's ethics committee, a process shielded from administrative interference. Suddenly, Marcus Thorne's pressure and Mr. Dewar's impatience hit a wall of procedure. The independent fMRI was scheduled for 72 hours later. The hospital, to protect itself from liability, assigned security to room 907. not to keep Maya out, but to ensure no one unauthorized went in. Those 3 days were a siege. Anonymous threats still came to Maya's phone. A car she didn't recognize idled outside her mother's diner, but the sunlight of scrutiny was now their enemy. She gave copies of the paper file, the break line report, the payments, to a local investigative reporter with the understanding they'd be published if anything happened to her or Vance. The story was now a tripwire. The morning of the fMRI, the room was crowded with witnesses. The independent neurologist, Dr. Aris Thorne, no relation to Marcus, was a renowned specialist from a university hospital. Cynthia Porter was there, a hospital lawyer. And Maya, Robert Vance, was transferred to the imaging suite, a fragile procession of tubes and machines. The test itself was an hour of tense silence. Dr. Aris explained they would perform a simple protocol. They would speak specific words and phrases to Vance through headphones while the machine mapped his brain's blood flow. Words like water, pain, yes, no, and the personal words Maya provided, Clara, Elise, Vantage. They all watched the monitors in the adjacent control room. For the first 40 minutes, the scans showed the minimal, disordered activity consistent with a vegetative state. The hospital lawyer began to look relieved. Then, the technician prompted, word stimulus, Clara. The screen erupted. A specific, brilliant region of the brain, the auditory cortex, and strikingly, the limbic system, associated with emotion, lit up with intense, coordinated activity. It was a clear, unambiguous signature. The brain was not only hearing the word, it was recognizing it, it was feeling it. Again, Dr. Aris said, his voice tight with focus, Clara. The same pattern, a neural scream. Next, Elise. The reaction was different, but just as significant. A separate network fired, the prefrontal cortex, involved in complex thought and fear. The brain activity spiked, then showed a pattern of suppression, as if shutting down. The final test was a motor imagery command. Robert, if you can hear me, imagine squeezing your right hand. They watched the motor cortex. For 10 seconds, nothing. Then, a faint but distinct activation in the precise area controlling the right hand. He was trying. He was in there, trapped, but present. Dr. Aris turned from the screen, his face pale. This patient is not in a persistent vegetative state. He exhibits clear signs of covert consciousness. He is aware. The hospital lawyer's mouth was a thin line. The medical foundation of the entire push to withdraw care had just crumbled to dust. The recommendation was not merely conservative, it was medically and ethically wrong. The fallout was immediate and brutal. With the new diagnosis, any move to withdraw life support became legally untenable. More importantly, the why behind the false diagnosis demanded answers. Dr. Liam Shaw was suspended, under the threat of losing his license, and presented with the memo mentioning the administering agent he broke. He admitted to being pressured by Marcus Thorne to interpret the initial scans with pessimistic rigor. He confirmed that a specific, rarely used vasoconstrictor had been added to Vance's IV during the stress test, a drug known to trigger hemorrhagic strokes in vulnerable patients. He gave them the name of the nurse, Geraldine Mills, who administered it. Geraldine Mills, faced with the evidence and a promise of witness protection for her son, confessed. She detailed the pressure, the threat to her child. The physical evidence, the medication log, the altered dosage record, was still in the system, hastily covered up but not deleted. The dominoes fell. Marcus Thorne and Elise Vance were arrested at a private airfield, attempting to leave the country. The digital drive from the server, combined with the testimonies, formed an unassailable case of conspiracy, attempted murder, and massive fraud. The fake detective Russo was exposed as a private security contractor with ties to Thorne. Robert Vance's legal death sentence was commuted, but his medical battle was just beginning. Covert consciousness meant a staggering, grueling road of potential rehabilitation. He was transferred to a specialized facility. Maya, still his legal surrogate, visited weekly. She would read the business news to him, talk about her community college classes. Sometimes she would just say his wife's name, Clara, and on the new, sensitive monitors, his heart rate would always spike. Then came the final, surprising detail. As the court untangled Vance's affairs, a sealed letter was found in his attorney's safe deposit box. It was an updated will, executed just 1 week before his stroke. It disinherited Elise, as expected, but it did not leave his fortune to charity or the company. It established a blind trust, with a single, unconventional instruction. The trust was to be managed by a panel, and its annual dividends were to be paid out as grants to individuals who demonstrated unexpected integrity in the face of institutional pressure. The first named and permanent member of the selection panel was the person serving as his healthcare surrogate at the time of his incapacitation. He had, in his last lucid act, bet his entire legacy on the character of a stranger he hadn't yet met. He had foreseen the betrayal, and he had built a trap of his own, one that could only be sprung by someone honest enough not to pull the plug and brave enough to stand alone. Maya Ruiz, the janitor's daughter, was now the gatekeeper to a billion-dollar legacy dedicated to rewarding people like her. She didn't want the money. She refused a large personal sum, but she accepted the role on the panel. Her first act was to fund a foundation for families of patients with covert consciousness, to provide the independent medical advocacy she'd had to fight for. The last scene was in the new rehabilitation center. Spring had come. Robert Vance was in a chair by a window, not a hospital window, but one looking onto a garden. He could not speak. He could not move, but an eye-gaze computer now sat before him, and with agonizing slowness, he was learning to use it. Maya sat beside him, telling him about the first grant they'd awarded to a nurse who exposed safety violations. On the screen, his eye hovered, and then clicked a single, pre-programmed word. Good. That single word, good, from a man who could not speak, changes everything. It reminds us that consciousness is not a light switch, simply on or off. It is often a dimmer, a flicker in a locked room. Medical studies suggest thousands are misdiagnosed as vegetative while aware, trapped inside unresponsive bodies. Robert Vance was one of the lucky few whose room was found, because someone refused to believe the silence was empty. This story was never just about a billionaire and a janitor's daughter. It was about the quiet, brutal war between two kinds of power. The kind that sits in corner offices and signs orders, and the kind that shows up, that cleans, that cares, that refuses to look away. The system, with all its hierarchies and protocols, had appointed Maya Ruiz as a convenient tool to finalize a crime. Instead, she became the flaw in the machine, the unexpected variable. The human being who asked why when everyone demanded how fast. We live in a world that often confuses price with value and noise with truth. The most important decisions, the ones about life, death, and integrity, are frequently pushed onto those with the least social armor, the ones we train ourselves not to see. The cleaners, the aides, the temp workers. This story asks a lingering question: who in your world holds a power you haven't noticed, and what would happen if they chose to use it? Maya's power wasn't in a title or a bank account. It was in her stubborn, inconvenient humanity. It was in her willingness to sit with a dying stranger and imagine he might still be living. It was in her courage to stand in a brightly lit office and say no to a consensus of very important people. That kind of power is available to anyone. It costs nothing but everything. Robert Vance's legacy is no longer a company or a fortune. It is a testament to the idea that our truest safeguard against corruption is not a better law, but a better person. He built a final trap for greed, but it could only be sprung by decency. In the end, the most sophisticated encryption he ever designed was an ethical one. If this story found an echo in you, if it reminded you that the world is changed not by shouts from the top, but by quiet stands in the middle, then you're already part of this conversation. We tell these stories because they are true in spirit, because they map the hidden geography of human courage. They are the antidote to the noise. Subscribe to this channel for more journeys into the heart of decisions that define us. Share your thoughts in the comments. When have you seen unexpected integrity change a situation? Pass this story along to someone who needs a reminder that their quiet presence matters more than they know. Thank you for listening, for staying, for remembering that sometimes the most profound truths are whispered by the people we're taught to ignore. We'll see you in the next story.